On August 5th, 1986, a human skull would be found in a drainage ditch near an interstate in Placer County, California, although it wouldn't be until 37 years later, on December 27, 2023, that forensics would finally be able to identify it. The skull belonged to a woman named Donna Lass. Donna Lass was a 25-year-old woman who became a missing person in 1970. She was a nurse at a first aid station in a hotel casino located in South Lake Tahoe, California. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance were off-putting, to say the least. The logbook at her work showed that she had clocked in but hadn't finished writing her time out. Moreover, her car was found at her apartment. However, no one saw Donna leave the casino, but the strangest detail came from a phone call made the day after she disappeared. It was then an unidentified man made a call to Donna's landlord and another to her boss, both saying the same thing, that Donna would be out of town due to a sudden family emergency. Donna's boss, being suspicious, contacted Donna's mother, who confirmed there was no such emergency. An investigation was set out to find Donna, but to no avail. 6 months later, on March 22, 1971, a Lake Tahoe postcard was sent to the San Francisco Chronicle. The postcard was sent by one of the most notorious serial killers in modern history, the Zodiac Killer. This elusive murderer was known for his letters, which he used to taunt authorities with, and this one seemed to heavily allude to Donna Lass's murder and possible burial place, which turned up nothing in the end. Some are convinced that Donna Lass was one of the many victims of the Zodiac, but South Lake Tahoe police are not too quick to affirm this assumption. For one, no evidence has ever definitively linked the Zodiac Killer to Donna Lass's disappearance. What's more, the Zodiac was not known to hide bodies, and hidden Donna was for years. Her skull was only recently found, but her body is still missing. So with this in mind, who could have abducted Donna and made those mysterious phone calls, if not the Zodiac? On November 22nd, 1963, a local switchboard operator from Oxnard, California would receive a call. The operator answered with no response on the other line before feminine whispering could be heard. It was unclear at first until the voice of a woman seemingly middle-aged whispered ominously,
"The president is going to die at 10:10.
There was a brief pause. It had been near 10:10 a.m. The silence was broken by the woman, who then said,
"The president is going to die at 10:30.
For the next 10 to 15 minutes, the woman was documented as making more cryptic predictions and was promptly hung up on, believed to be a prankster or disturbed. But sure enough, the president of the United States at the time, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated on 12:30 p.m. Central Time in Dallas, Texas. But in California, that would mean JFK was shot at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time. What's more, the president's limo would have been in the plaza at 10:10 a.m. Pacific Time, but was delayed due to crowds. A few years back, a post would be made to Reddit by a user named Mistrius about a strange reoccurring phone call that harassed their brother. Quote, "A few years ago, my brother would get a call on his cell phone around 2 to 3 a.m. every night. He would answer, and it was this hellish sounding noise, like static mixed with screams. He changed his cell number after a month of this, and it stopped. Then, after a week or so, it began again. The exact same noise, exact same time. Finally, one day he decided to backdial the call. It was an old man that had no clue what he was talking about. Still, the calls persisted. If he didn't answer, it would call a few more times. No messages were left. He decided to say screw it, ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and then got a new number. You guessed it, the screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time, he was terrified every night, unsure why this was happening. He backdialed the number again and got a different person. Around this time, he lost his job and his phone. The calls stopped, of course. His phone was disconnected now. So one day my mom asked me to listen to this weird message she got on our home phone. It was the static screaming. We showed my brother and he was freaking out. He backdialed the number again and it said the number was disconnected this time. Never heard from it again after that." unquote. Weird. Odd enough that someone out there was calling this guy at any time like clockwork, but from 2 to 3 a.m. every morning? And not only that, they knew how to find him even after he changed his cell number, traded in his phone, and finally ended his phone contract by harassing him through his home phone. How could the culprit have done all this? And what for? Really, all I want to know is what the hellish static screams sounded like. The Howard Stern Show is no stranger to controversy. Stern and his show are notorious for discussing rather frowned-upon topics that other radio stations at the time neglected to cover or address. But there was one instance that took place on the show that even made Howard shudder. A man called the station live on air claiming to be a serial killer who murdered at least 12 sex workers. The man claimed to be a white resident of New Orleans and told the hosts that they could refer to him by the name Clay.
All right, I got a guy on the phone who claims he's been killing prostitutes and he's wondering why he's doing it. Oh, God. So maybe he thinks I have an answer. Is this Ed? Ed?
No, this isn't Ed.
Oh.
You haven't killed any prostitutes?
No, I never said my name was Ed.
Oh.
Sorry.
That's okay.
What name do you use?
You can call me Clay.
Clay?
Clay?
Yes, Clay. Okay, Clay. So what happened? How many prostitutes have you killed?
12.
And you're wondering why you do it?
I have a pretty good idea.
And then what, you strangle them?
Once.
How else did you kill them?
Well, a few times, actually most times with a hammer.
And where do you do this primarily?
I've done it twice in a parking garage, and then the rest of the times on the side of the road.
And you're from the New Orleans area?
Yes.
Are these mostly white chicks or black chicks?
A fair number of them have been black. The transvestite was black.
You think there's some racial motivation here?
No, Howard. They were just, let's just say a Jimmy Swaggart town.
Now, calls like this were a dime a dozen on Howard's show, but this guy didn't seem like some run-of-the-mill prankster as the hosts, Howard and Robin, were used to. This call would allegedly be investigated by the FBI as it seemed to be connected to a New Orleans case, that of the Storyville Slayer. The Storyville Slayer is the moniker given to an unidentified serial killer who, you guessed it, murdered at least 12 or more prostitutes in the New Orleans area. This criminal targeted black females ranging from the ages 17 to 42. The bodies were usually strangled, beaten, and drowned and found in rivers or swamps after years of decomposition, meaning that some of the Slayer's victims are currently Jane Does in the investigation. There were two major suspects linked to the Slayer's crimes. The first was Victor Gant. Gant was later let go because there wasn't enough incriminating evidence against him. It's even mentioned in the call that the original suspect questioned about the killings was a black man, as Gant was.
You're a white guy?
Yeah, Howard, that's pretty funny because the only suspect they had when they started finding the bodies was a black police officer.
Oh.
Many believe he's referring to Victor Gant. The other suspect was a white man, Russell Elwood. Now, Elwood would actually be convicted of one of the Storyville murders, that of Cheryl Lewis, being the only murder linked to the Storyville Slayer case that has officially been solved. This would lead law enforcement to assume that there may have been more than one perpetrator. This would make sense. While many think Elwood was the one who called the Howard Stern Show, it's highly unlikely because around the time the call was made, Elwood was incarcerated for the possession of illegal substances. So could Clay be one of, if not the perpetrator responsible for these Storyville slayings in New Orleans? Even if he isn't, he is definitely a disturbed individual. The man made some outlandish remarks and smart aleck comebacks that would have any normal practical joker in stitches. But he remains composed and unfazed in the entire 17-minute call.
What do you say to her to torment her? How do you break the news to her that she's going to die?
It really depends on my mood.
Just give us an example.
Well, if I wanted to, I could just say Baba Booey, but that would be pretty,
No, come on, be serious. What do you say to him?
But what do you think? Serial killer or depraved jokester? Violet Jessup was a voluntary aid detachment nurse for the UK. She's of course known as the Unsinkable Woman because she miraculously survived 3 Olympic-class ship disasters. One of these being the infamous sinking of the Titanic on April 15th, 1912. As passengers were being escorted on lifeboats, Jessup was entrusted to look after a baby while boarding lifeboat 16. Eventually, the survivors were rescued by the Carpathia. On board, a woman took the baby Jessup had in her arms and ran off crying. Jessup presumed that this woman was the baby's mother and didn't question the encounter. Fast forward to where Jessup is now retired, a little after 1960, she received a call on a stormy night from a woman she didn't know. She asked Jessup if she had saved a baby during the Titanic disaster. Jessup answered yes. In a response, the voice on the other line laughed, saying,
I was that baby.
And then hung up abruptly. When relaying this story to her friend and biographer, John Maxstone Graham, he believed that it could have been some kids prank calling her, but Jessup firmly stated that she had never told anyone about the baby she had protected that night. According to records, Lifeboat 16 only had one baby on board named Assad Thomas, a boy who died a young man in 1931. This call supposedly took place after Jessup's retirement in 1960. So, who could have made that call, and how did they know about Jessup's story on that fateful day? Definitely a much lighter entry compared to others on this list. If you've been on TikTok long enough now, I'm sure you've heard the audio of a call between a man and a female telemarketer who claims that she's a real person. What a lot of people don't know is the story behind this phone call. In 2013, a telemarketer named Samantha West just so happened to contact Michael Schur, a Time Washington bureau chief. The call started out normally with Samantha selling health insurance to Michael, but Michael could tell something was off. Samantha was dodging basic questions like what vegetable is in tomato soup and what day of the week was yesterday. This was all while she maintained a very staged persona. So eventually Michael point blank asked Samantha if she was a robot. This was her response.
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm calling about an online request you once made about health insurance coverage.
Okay.
I work with all major companies and compare...
Hey, are you a robot?
What? No, I am a real person. Maybe we have a bad connection. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's crazy. I see you just sound so much like a robot.
I am a real person. Maybe we have a bad connection. I'm sorry about that.
Will you tell me you're not a robot? Just say I'm not a robot, please.
I am a real person.
I mean, I believe you, but will you just say I'm not a robot? It'll make me feel better to hear you say it.
There is a live person here.
But I know there is. It would just make me feel so much better to hear you say I am not a robot.
What?
If you could say the words I'm not a robot, it would really mean a lot to me.
I am a real person. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I just want to hear you say, I am not a robot.
Yes, I'm a real person.
Right, but will you say I'm not a robot?
Health Enrollment Center? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. Are you currently on Medicare?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
But now let me ask you a question.
Medicaid or looking for Medicaid?
We'll go, you ask me a question, then I'll ask you a question. How about that?
Sure.
Okay, are you a robot?
No.
Will you say I'm not a robot?
Yeah, definitely not a robot. The reporters of Time were so intrigued by Samantha that they spent an hour calling the number back to try to get to the bottom of how this bot system worked. Keep in mind, this was 2013, a decade before AI technology was as available as it is now. At least publicly. So while yes, robot calls have been a thing for years, one being this lifelike and accurately responsive was definitely alien back then. But it gets even weirder. The Samantha West bot was programmed to direct potential customers to a human insurance agent. So the reporters of Time eagerly answered Samantha's questions so that they could be transferred to a company affiliate that they could get answers from. But every time one would mention Samantha West, the agents would always reply that they never used robot calls before abruptly hanging up the receiver. One employee even said that the number Samantha West was calling from, which is now inactive, wasn't the company's number. So if that's the case, where did Samantha West come from? Who programmed her? Was the programming meant to scam customers? I don't know, but something somewhere is fishy. I'm sure some of you are familiar with philanthropist and industrialist Andrew Carnegie, the man who led the American steel industry in the late 19th century, becoming one of the wealthiest Americans in history. Well, he has nothing to do with this entry. His nephew, who was named after him, however, does. Andrew Carnegie Whitfield. 28-year-old Andrew Carnegie Whitfield, being an amateur pilot, owned a personal Taylor Club monoplane, which he used for practice. He'd accumulated 200 hours of flying experience and was pretty good at it, according to his friends and family. One day on April 17th, 1938, Whitfield was scheduled to fly from an airfield in Mineola, New York, to another airfield in Brentwood, New York, both around the Long Island region. The flight was approximately 22 miles away and was only supposed to take Whitfield about 15 minutes or so, but after a while, 15 minutes turned to 20. 20 became 30. 30 became 45. Sure enough, an hour passed by with Whitfield failing to arrive in Brentwood. An investigation went underway to find Whitfield to see if he went somewhere else, but searches yielded nothing. Whitfield seemingly vanished with no trace, and his personal aircraft was never recovered. To this day, they are both still missing. Now, what does this have to do with a phone call? I'm getting there. During the police's investigation, they found that Whitfield had checked into a Long Island hotel on the day he disappeared. He checked into the room under the alias Albert C. White, paid $4 in advance for it, and never checked out. Whitfield had left behind most of his essential belongings in his hotel room: his passport, clothing, stock and bond certificates, and 2 life insurance policies with his wife Elizabeth Whitfield listed as the beneficiary. But that wasn't all. While his family was out searching for him, phone records showed that Whitfield had called his home from the hotel. Now, being 1938, this was the day when telephone operators would direct calls, and on that day, an operator claimed that she overheard Whitfield on the phone saying, quote, "Well, I'm going to carry out my plan." Unquote. No one knows what this plan was or what it referred to exactly, but police concluded that it meant Whitfield had arranged to take his own life. Odd, since he never seemed to show signs of wanting to do so. While he had a supposed argument with his wife before his disappearance, he was still a newlywed and didn't appear to have problems at work. He was wealthy and had his whole life ahead of him, so why would he just disappear under the presumption of an ominous plan? Looks like the only one meant to know was the person Whitfield called that night. It was a Thursday afternoon in 1990 on the 12th of April. 4 commercial fishermen set out on a week-long journey along the coast of Georgia. The crew included Billy Joe Neesmith, the captain, Keith Wilkes, Billy Joe's nephew, Franklin Brantley, a family friend, and Nathan Neesmith, Billy Joe's brother. The 4 men set off from Richmond Hill in a snapper boat named the Casey Nicole, which was owned by Billy Joe's boss, Doug Tyson. The Casey Nicole had recently been under maintenance before this time, but the work done to it apparently wasn't thorough. Early in the morning on April 13th, the ship had been gradually sinking, with a foot of water surrounding the inside of the boat's hold. The water pumps were inactive, the engine itself was stalling, and all power on the ship shut off, rendering radio communication impossible. Eventually, the crew were forced to abandon ship and board the life raft, but even the raft was faulty. Not only was it made for strictly 2 people, it was rotting away with a hole in it. After floating a bit, Nathan had noticed the hull of the boat about 3 miles away and decided to swim after it, despite his crewmates pleading him to stay with them. Nathan eventually made it to the hull, swimming the rest of the day. Nathan lost sight of the others. The next day at the hull, Nathan spotted a freighter ship around where he believed his shipmates were still located. It made random stops and circles for 3 hours before disappearing altogether. Eventually, Nathan survived and was rescued on April 15th, adrift with no food or water in the hot sun for 4 days, stuck in a styrofoam bait box. However, Nathan's shipmates were never found, nor was the lifeboat that they were floating on. No one knows what could have happened to them, but most have an idea. 6 months after the trip, on October 5th, 1990, Nathan and Billy Joe's sister, Onita, had received a strange phone call from a male voice which spoke in Spanish. The only thing the voice said in English were Onita's name and her home phone number, which he was calling from. That same day, another phone call was made to Doug Tyson, the owner of the Casey Nicole. Again, the caller spoke in Spanish, only saying Doug's name and number in English. A year later, on March 6, 1991, a call presumably made by the same man was made again to Onita. The caller spoke his first and only English sentence on the phone. "I am bringing them home." With these calls, the Neesmiths and Tysons believed the 3 fishermen were taken to a foreign country against their will, and someone was putting themselves at risk to let the families know that they were still alive, and were planning on returning them home. But if that had been the case, the plan might have failed. Since that fateful day in 1990, Billy Joe Neesmith, Keith Wilkes, and Franklin Brantley are still missing and are legally presumed deceased. Another one off of Reddit. A user named 7Ralphie had another secondhand account of a mysterious phone call. Quote, "Before my family and I moved to another state, my father went and visited the area to check on the progress of our new house, which was still being built. My father was there for a few days and was staying at some crappy Motel 6 in a shady area of town. His room was the last room at the end of the hallway on the top floor. In the middle of the night, on the last night he was in town, he was awoken by the phone ringing in his room. He groggily answers. It was the front desk, and they say something along the lines of, 'Sorry to wake you. We've been receiving a couple of reports about rooms being broken into and some stuff being stolen. We're calling to make sure you lock your doors and are safe.' My father replies that he is fine and hangs up. He decides to go double check that he locked the door. As he sits up in bed, he notices that the door to his room is ajar. Being spooked, he continuously checks the room and finds out that nothing is missing and no one else is in the room. He creeps to the door and peeks out. Sitting right outside his room, on the windowsill of the hallway window, is his shaving kit. Creeped out of his mind, he quickly grabs it and locks the door. After he calms down a bit, he calls the front desk and says, "Hey, you just called me about the break-ins around the hotel, and I just wanted to report that my room was just broken into when I was sleeping. Nothing is stolen, and I'm fine. Figured you'd like to know." The front desk replies, "You must have been mistaken. We never called your room, and we haven't received any reports of break-ins." Unquote. Creepy, sure, but the more I think about this one, the less sense it makes. Let's say this for example. The first caller was a home intruder who, for whatever reason, calls his victims under the guise of a trustworthy figure, warns them about potential thefts before breaking into their hotel rooms to steal only mildly convenient belongings like shaving kits and set them outside their door for no other reason than to prove to them that he can? plan? What exactly is the motive here? If it's a prank, why go to that much trouble for seemingly no payoff? I'm also playing with the possibility that the dad dreamed the first call and that his shaving kit was stolen before waking up to call the front desk, but that seems unlikely. There's also the chance that the break-ins were legitimate and the second caller was just another staff member unaware of said break-ins, but I don't think I buy that either because someone stealing hotel guest belongings would definitely stir chaos. I don't know, this one is indeed mysterious. What do you think? Gary Sudbrink is a man who was stationed as a captain in the U.S. Air Force located in San Antonio, Texas. One day on February of 1993, then 27-year-old Gary decided to surprise his family in Long Island, New York, by visiting them and staying for a while. Things started to get weird as he made his plans, however. On the airport headed to New York, a man accosted Gary with a clipboard and pen, asking him very personal questions that made Gary uncomfortable. He tried to ignore the stranger before he would eventually board his plane. But on the plane, another man sat in the seat next to Gary, a seat which wasn't his, and clipboard in hand also proceeded to harass him. The man was escorted to his seat, but the strangeness didn't end there. Gary had called his friend Mike, telling him that he was coming home, but Mike said that Gary had already called to tell him that the day prior. Gary, in fact, had not. If people pressuring for personal information or imposters pretending to be others on the phone aren't enough to raise your brows, just wait until you hear the phone calls Gary would receive when he got to his parents' house later that day.
Hello?
Yeah. Hello?
There's Gary Sudbrink there.
Yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, what is your question? I'll answer it.
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
How long?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Right. When am I coming back? Is that your question? Okay, there was a break. Hold on. You want to know when I'm coming back to Texas? Oh, is that your question?
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
How long am I going to be back from Texas? That question doesn't make any sense.
By the other voice.
Okay. I'll be coming back eventually. I can't tell you when. You should know that question, the answer to the questions, because you seem to know more about me than I do. You know what I'm saying?
Are you an intergalactic person?
Are you a space alien?
Sounds like he hung up.
I can't believe this.
He hung up, Gary.
See if he comes back.
All right, I'll hang up.
Gary had started getting these calls from an unlisted number that were so relentless, he started recording them via his parents' answering machine. There are 4 recorded calls in all, each taken from the night of February 8th to the morning of February 9th, each one being weirder than the last. There's a lot to dissect here. The voice in these calls seems to be a distorted, heavily edited voice, most likely slowed and pitched down to its minimum. What it says exactly are usually either very cryptic questions such as, how long are you going to be back from Texas? Or ominous statements like, you're being impersonated by the other voice. It has little bearing, but a lot of people like to point out that the Texas question actually implies that Gary is still in Texas, which means the caller should have said, how long are you going to be back from New York? But that's a minor grammatical error on the mystery caller's part. The voice on the other line doesn't seem to be an actual person at all, but recorded phrases replayed every so often, almost like they're being played on a tape recorder. The Sudbrinks don't seem to catch on to this detail as they proceed to respond to the voice as if it will eventually answer them, but it's pretty evident when listening to the audio back that it's just a series of pre-recorded messages. Bottom line, these calls are probably the result of 2 things. The Sudbrinks made this up as a joke, or someone is actually pranking them. If it's the former, Why? The Sudbrinks seem to be reserved people who don't like attention, and the most publicity they got out of this was from minor coverage online. And if it's the latter, then that means someone had to know Gary's full name, the number to Gary's parents' phone number, Mike's number, and the fact that Gary left Texas. Not to mention, they had to know how to imitate Gary's voice in the phone call made to Mike. But if you want to know the full story for yourself, I'll have the hashtag for Gary Sudbrink's calls linked in the description at your disposal. Just click it and you'll find tons of standalone videos on the case, most with the audio of all 4 calls in full. Happy sleuthing! Tracy Kirkpatrick was a 17-year-old girl who lived near Frederick, Maryland. A responsible young woman, Tracy held 2 part-time jobs to help pay for college, in which she was learning to become a lawyer. One of those jobs was a sales clerk at a ladies' sportswear shop in a mall. One night on March 15th, 1989, Tracy was to close up shop. It was her first shift to close alone. The store closed at 9 p.m., but it was almost 11 and the lights were still on with the front door unlocked. A security guard investigated inside the store and he discovered Tracy's lifeless body on the floor in a storage room. Police were contacted but could find no discernible motive to the murder. There were no signs of a struggle, her body didn't appear to be assaulted in any way, and the store wasn't robbed. The only thing missing that belonged to Tracy was her purse, but other than that, this case came to a screeching halt. That was until June of that same year. 3 months after Tracy's murder, a man addressing himself as Don called into a nationwide confession hotline based in Las Vegas. The concept of this hotline was to charge people to share their deepest secrets and have listeners pay to hear them. The calls would be recorded, so we have physical evidence of this man's confession. This was what Don said in the phone call.
Hello, my name is Don, and I'm calling from Frederick, Maryland. I know this is going to sound surprising, but 3 months ago, I stabbed a girl to death. And you might think that in making this tape, I'm setting myself up to be caught, but there are a lot of guys named Don in Frederick. The girl I killed was working in a ladies' sportswear store. I often came by and talked to her when she was working alone. And one night when she was in the storeroom and we were talking, our conversation turned into an argument. And so I took out a knife that I have with me at all times and I killed her. And a few days later I realized that I had created a lot of sadness. And I thought about turning myself into the police. But whatever they do to me, that won't bring Tracy back. So I decided that I better keep free because we have the death penalty in Maryland. Thanks for listening. I'm sorry about what I did, but nothing can change it. Bye.
The hotline notified Frederick police, who traced the call to a supermarket in Walkersville, Maryland, 7 miles of Frederick. The call would be played on radio stations to see if anyone out there could identify the voice. Originally, there was no luck until one day when a Massachusetts woman named Martha Woodworth contacted the authorities to let them know of a man who had been calling her concerning the Tracy Kirkpatrick case. The man was unhealthily obsessed with Tracy's murder and got into contact with Martha as she was known to be a claimed psychic. This man went by the name Sean. Martha recognized the voice in the call as Sean's, and eventually so did listeners on various stations that played the recording. After a combined effort, Frederick police located Don, aka Sean, who lived in Walkersville. But the man's name wasn't Sean or Don. His name isn't documented at all, as he prefers to remain anonymous. Weirder still, nothing in his home was found which could have linked him to Tracy Kirkpatrick's murder, and so he was cleared. although he's still considered a suspect along with a security guard who found her body, coincidentally also named Dawn, and Tracy's ex-boyfriend. But as of now, the tragic case of Tracy Kirkpatrick remains cold. A man named Bashir Khashoggi and his wife moved to Beirut, Lebanon in 1974, where Bashir's wife would sing to entertain guests at the Phoenicia Hotel. This hotel is known to be a place where mostly diplomats and arms dealers would go to gather. One night on July 1st, 1974, Bashir was waiting to pick up his wife from a party at the hotel when a van full of men with machine guns abducted him. For the next 5 days, Bashir was tortured by these unknown individuals and left in a windowless basement with only small meals to keep him alive. Convinced he was going to die, Bashir injured himself in an attempt to take his own life. But when his captors found him in a pool of his own blood, they surprisingly took him to a hospital where he recovered and miraculously escaped. Bashir's abductors never found him again, and he was safe at last. By 1983, Bashir moved to the United States, where he became a successful owner of a Moroccan-themed restaurant, the Marrakesh Restaurant in D.C. When the restaurant was under construction, a phone line would be installed, and immediately Bashir would receive calls to the restaurant where there would be silence or breathing on the other end. Soon enough, as the restaurant's business grew, so did the strange calls. The mysterious caller would threaten whoever answered the phone, but would seem to target Bashir, as they seemed to know everything about him, even the names of his friends and colleagues he hadn't spoken to in years. Bear in mind, these were the days before Facebook. These threatening calls grew to harassment, calling the restaurant up to 20 times daily. The messages within these calls were sporadic, ranging from sounds of laughter, screaming, machine gun fire, and a series of voices that the caller would either mimic or play recordings of. The caller used an array of voices, but one stood out among the rest: the voice of a young girl, which would give the elusive culprit the nickname L'Enfant, French for the child. L'Enfant seemed to follow Bashir everywhere he went, even contacting him when visiting his sister restaurant in Philadelphia. Now, usually phone pranks, even elaborate ones such as this, are short-lived, but L'Enfant's harassment went on for a full decade. After a while, the calls seemed to cause Bashir PTSD from the time he had been abducted in 1974, and so he believed his captors were behind the L'Enfant calls. One day, the harassment reached beyond virtual threats. Bashir would discover the Star of David carved into his Mercedes, and his Jeep had been tampered to catch on fire. Fearing for his life, Bashir contacted the FBI, who attempted to tap the calls from the Marrakesh. They came short of identifying the source behind the calls, but discovered that they originated from multiple payphones located in the metropolitan areas of DC. About 3,000 calls from L'Enfant were traced, and it was discovered that they were made within seconds of each other, suggesting that multiple people had to be behind them. The ongoing harassment drove Bashir, a once calm and likable man, insane, and he checked himself into a mental health facility. Here, L'Enfant continued to call the Marrakesh and even contacted the number of the hospital Bashir had been staying in. But one day, the case of L'Enfant became so notorious it was featured in an episode of Unsolved Mysteries in 1993, a decade after this all took place. As soon as this episode had aired, the L'Enfant calls stopped, never to be heard from again. No arrests behind L'Enfant were made, and the FBI closed the case, likely making this mystery unsolved for good. Born on April 23, 1948, Dorothy Scott was a 32-year-old single mother living in Anaheim, California with her then 4-year-old son. She lived what most would consider a mundane life. She was a workaholic, a homebody, and a devout Christian who never partied or drank. She hardly went out on dates and didn't have a steady boyfriend so far as anyone was concerned. While those who knew her would say she led an uninteresting life, there was one person who would think she hung the moon, in the worst way possible. In early 1980, Dorothy would begin receiving strange phone calls from an unidentified male voice. The caller would alternate between professing his love for her and outright threatening to murder her. One report stated that the caller told Dorothy he would, quote, cut her into bits so that no one would find her, unquote. These calls were relentless, with the man proving that he knew Dorothy's whereabouts, plans, what she was wearing, and ultimately every move she made. People would recall Dorothy claiming that the voice on the other line sounded familiar to her, but she couldn't place it exactly. On May 28, 1980, Dorothy drove two co-workers, Pam Head and Conrad Bostron, to the hospital after Conrad had been bitten by a black widow spider. After Conrad was released, Dorothy went to retrieve her car to pick up her friends, but this would be the last time anyone would see Dorothy alive. That night in the ER's parking lot, Pam and Conrad flagged Dorothy's car down as it sped past them aggressively. They couldn't see who had been driving due to the car's brights being on. It was believed that Dorothy's stalker abducted her and drove away with her car, as she was never heard from again. Around this time, the man presumed to be Dorothy's stalker called her mother, taunting her by asking, "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" and then telling her, "I've got her," before immediately hanging up. As an investigation for Dorothy ensued, a man called the Orange County Register saying this, quote, "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." Unquote. The man knew details about the night Dorothy went missing that weren't made public at the time, so his confession was deemed authentic. But even with this, the perpetrator never revealed his name. 4 years later, on August 6th, 1984, Dorothy's remains would be found almost near where she disappeared, along with some dog bones. The Scott family would finally be given closure, but their troubles wouldn't be over. Not long after the discovery of Dorothy's remains, the stalker went on to further taunt Dorothy's parents a final time, asking them, "Is Dorothy there?" before hanging up. The police could never trace any call the man made, as he would make sure to stay on the line as briefly as possible. This was also before the days of caller ID, not to mention stalking wasn't a crime then, so the caller could easily get away with his constant harassment. Despite the confession and discovery of Dorothy's bones, the identity of Dorothy's stalker, abductor, and killer remains a mystery.